Emily and I got married before heading west. I had been reading novels since I was 8 years old and knew the West like the back of my hand. One winter, my parents died of the flu, so we got married, sold Mom and Dad's farm, and bought a ranch in Colorado out of nowhere. The seller's letters assured me that it was fertile and profitable. 640 acres of land, 20 miles from the city, was just what was needed. And having invested almost all the money in land, we went to our new home. Like all the Wild West heroes I've read about, I knew there was adventure and a pot of gold just over the next hill. Jake sat on a bench in front of the hotel, stretched out his legs and covered himself with a hat from the hot rays of the sun. On the wooden plank floor next to him, the hotel dog dozed, whining and from time to time twitching from some kind of vivid canine sleep. Maybe he was chasing rabbits, and Jake was hoping he'd get a nice, fat, juicy rabbit. Watching the townspeople go about their business, Jake felt like he was having a good time. He has worked at the Smith Ranch for the past 3 years. Wars were breaking out all over Colorado, and Old Man Smith needed protection. For the last 3 years, he had been paying an incredible $150 a month, plus what he found. Unable to spend money, Jake kept almost all of it in the bank. The war on the distant approaches flared up and then died down without ever starting. But Old Man Smith was still worried. He put Jake and 2 other mercenaries on half pay, giving them time off instead. The rotation meant that there were always 2 of them on the ranch. There were constant raids by Indians and bandits, and the ranch was a rich target. But at the same time, Jake received more than twice as much as a regular cowboy, and almost 2 weeks of vacation every month to do as he pleased. Personally, he thought Old Smith was a fool, but he was rich, and it was such an easy job that it would be stupid to argue with him. In his free time from work, he went into town, played poker, had sex with 1 or 2 saloon girls, and relaxed. Maybe, from time to time, he went fishing or hunting. The wanderlust that had plagued him in his early years seemed to be fading, and he was beginning to think about settling down. He just needed the right woman. A small plot, several heads of cattle and children, someone who will bear his name. He had a reputation as a lightning-fast shot. Other ranchers constantly offered him large, almost obscene sums of money to get his trunk into their hotspot. True, he hated killing and therefore refused such offers. He had to shoot bad people more often than he cared to think about it. But that was the West. Lawlessness still reigned in vast areas of the country, and there were mischievous people who stole everything they could and killed everyone who stood in their way. Then there were people like him. He liked to think of himself as a good guy, one who offers protection to the weak and vulnerable for a certain price. A very good price, he chuckled to himself. With nearly $6,000 in the bank, he had enough money to retire. Maybe he will buy a small estate and have a few head of cattle and horses to earn money. A ranch costs between $200 and $500, depending on the amount of land, water, and fertility. Recently, he had his eye on a nice place 20 miles from the city, but someone in the east snatched it up before he got the chance. But the plot next to it was put up for sale. It was good land with water and timber, ideal for ranching. What's even better is that the 2 original owners built their homes right on the property line, 30 meters apart. He liked this idea. Just enough distance for privacy, but close enough for company or general protection if they were attacked. The hot sun had already become rather tiresome, and, feeling somewhat less full after the huge breakfast he had just eaten, he rose to his feet. Maybe he'll stop by Lincoln's office and make him an offer for the property. He could always sell it later if he decided to do something else. The hotel door next to him swung open, and the most stunning woman he had ever seen stepped and stood directly in his path along the boardwalk, nearly colliding with him. He automatically reached for his hat. Thank God he paid for his bath last night and put on fresh clothes this morning. "Ma'am," he lowered his hat respectfully. "I'm Jake, and you're Miss..." The door swung open again, and a thin young man stumbled out, lost his balance, and crashed into Jake. Accustomed to drunks bumping into him in the saloon, Jake simply pushed him away without looking. Staring at the lady, he did not notice how the young man hit the edge of the boardwalk. He waved his arms wildly, trying to catch his balance, and fell backwards onto the street, right into a pile of fresh shit. "I'm Emily," she answered Jake casually, watching in horror as her husband tried to return to his original position before falling. She covered her mouth with her knuckle, upset by the young man's fall. "Oh, Michael, your only clothes," she moaned, moving to help him. Jake realized he had stepped into his own pile of shit. It wasn't the best way to introduce myself. Maybe he was her brother or cousin. "Let me help, ma'am. It's my fault. I shouldn't have pushed him when he collided with me." Raising the stunned Michael, it became clear that he could not be brushed off. The back of his pants and shirt were smeared with shit. Inspiration hit Jake like a ton of bricks. He looked across the street. Myrtle's Milliner, John's bathhouse, and Molly's restaurant were lined up there. Could things have turned out better? "There's a fashion store over there. Let's go in and buy him some clothes while we clean these." "We can't afford this, Jake," Emily squeaked. "It's my fault, ma'am. It would never have occurred to me to let you pay." Jake grabbed one of the young teenagers passing by and threw him $1. "Go to the bathhouse and tell them to start preparing the bath. As soon as we find new clothes for this young man, he will come there. Then come back. I will give you these clothes so that you can take them to the Chinese for washing." Of course, Jake, his eyes widened in disbelief, looking at the whole $1. He had never had so much money at once in his life. Myrtle forced Michael to undress in the backyard, took his measurements, and then sent him to the bathhouse in only his underpants. The boy reappeared, his smile almost ear to ear, as Jake slipped him another $1 to take his dirty clothes to the laundry. After taking care of Michael, Emily wandered around the store, looking at clothes, hats, and shoes. Jake leaned over to Myrtle and whispered to her to take her time making new clothes for Michael. He is willing to pay twice as much if she delays the work. Myrtle looked at him strangely, but money is money. She agreed. Emily looked at the gorgeous dress hanging on the rack and caressed her fingers over the soft cotton twill fabric. Jake caught her quiet whisper. "This is wonderful. Why don't you try it on?" Jake encouraged her. "I can't afford it," she admitted. Myrtle hurried forward looking for a new proposal and overheard her. "It's only $3.50. Myrtle grabbed the dress in Emily's hand and dragged her into the fitting room. "But I cannot. Just try it on." Myrtle was in shock. This day was supposed to be profitable. Dress a customer in a dress and it will sell. She saw the look on Emily's face. While Emily was busy, Jake hurried to the next building and quickly paid for the bath, paying extra if they could make it last very long. He walked up to Michael's private room and knocked. "Michael, if you don't mind, it will take some time before you have a bath and are ready to get dressed. May I suggest taking Emily to Molly's restaurant next door and buying her lunch to make up for my rudeness?" The answer was not long in coming, and Michael replied, "That would be very nice of you, Jake. Thank you for all this. Please take care of my wife." "Definitely." Jumping Jehoshaphat. Was she married to that little mouse? Well, it made the game much more interesting. Emily wouldn't be the first married woman he'd helped become a fallen woman. Fighting men and their revolvers were irresistible to some women. At the milliner, Emily was still in the fitting room. "Will a hat and boots go with this dress?" Jake asked Myrtle in a whisper. She nodded enthusiastically. "Just tell her they come with the dress and I'll pay." Jake watched as Myrtle took off like a stallion scared of a rattlesnake, eager to please. She loved the smell of dollars. Myrtle quickly passed the boots and hat through the door and then disappeared inside. Jake suspected that she was helping Emily button her dress and lace her shoes. Millie reappeared and waved her arms towards the dressing room as if to say, "Get ready, here she comes." Emily walked out and Jake's heart sank. She was gorgeous and the dress looked like it was custom made for her. She was tiny, maybe 5'8". From under the hat, large cornflower blue eyes with long eyelashes and light curls hanging down to his shoulders looked at him. Her breasts were just the right size. Soft melons lay on her chest. Although he couldn't see her feet, the tiny size of the boots meant they were perfect. Her ass looked perfect too. the subtle crease in her dress highlighting the curve of those curves. Emily wasn't stupid. She had seen enough men staring at her to know what they were thinking. She saw the shocked look on Jake's face and knew she must look stunning in that dress. This secretly pleased her, but there was no way they could afford such a purchase. "I can't afford—" "Nonsense," Jake said. "This dress was made for her, wasn't it, Myrtle? I've seen several women try it on, but you, young lady, this dress is for you." "But—" Jake raised his hand. "No arguments. We'll take it. I'll gladly pay to make up for my bad behavior today." "But—" Jake put a finger to her lips, watching as her eyes widened in shock at the fact that a stranger allowed himself to touch her. "No, just no. You look absolutely stunning in it, and Michael will love it. By the way, he suggested that I take you to Molly's restaurant located next door and buy lunch. We'll have to wait until Myrtle is done with the clothes and the town has to see this beautiful vision in her new dress. This old cowboy will be swollen with pride that he can escort such a beautiful lady to dinner." He took her hand and threw it over his. "We'll be back in an hour or so, Myrtle." "Better give me 2 hours, Jake. It's a lot of work," she said, winking at him. On the way out, he grabbed a pair of white gloves, waving them at Myrtle, who nearly elated at the thought of how much money Jake was spending. Jake took Emily's unresisting hand and put on the gloves. Even when he took the wedding rings off her hand so the glove wouldn't tear and opened her purse to put them in, Emily didn't say a word. Those gorgeous cornflower blue eyes looked at him in awe. Emily was confused and confused. He didn't do anything wrong, and yet her mind couldn't process it. Emily couldn't resist showing off her new outfit a little while crossing her arms with this handsome cowboy. He was good-looking, at least 180 centimeters tall, dark hair, muscular body. He was so different from her, Michael. Jake looked tanned and fit, while Michael looked sickly, sunken-chested, and white as a corpse, or at least what she imagined a corpse to be. She's never seen one. She hoped that living here would help Michael grow into a manly man, like the dangerous-looking cowboy accompanying her. She couldn't shake the feeling that the revolver was rubbing against her thigh. She had heard stories of men armed like this, but it seemed like a fantasy to her. And yet, she could not deny that a man as large as life was walking next to her. I wonder if he ever used this revolver. Did he kill it? At this thought, a slight shudder ran through her. Suddenly, she had a brief, forbidden vision of Jake making love to her. Something told her that he wouldn't be simpering like Michael. No, he would take her passionately and make her body sing with desire and need, just like in those vicious, cheap romance novels. The ones that the ladies passed on quietly so that their husbands would not see them. She felt her feminine charms moisten at the thought and blushed slightly at her wicked thoughts. The men bowed their hats to Jake, and the women looked at her with envy, admiring her new clothes. He was obviously an important person here and was treated with respect. Her chin lifted noticeably. She was proud to be seen next to him. He was so gallant and polite, taking more than full responsibility for the fact that Michael ended up in this pile of crap. A quiet chuckle came out of nowhere as she remembered the shocked look on Michael's face, sitting in that pile of crap. Jake looked down at her, smiling as if he knew what she was thinking, and she felt herself blush again. For the first time in his life, Jake found himself not liking what he saw in the city. In the hot air above, the street hung a haze of dust, which was churned up by all the carts and horses, rummaging here and there until the ground looked like the finest flour. At the slightest breeze, it would fly apart. The pungent stench of horse shit lying on the street hit his nose, despite the fact that he had been around horses and cows all his life. He found that he didn't like walking here. Everything was covered in a layer of dust, and the thought of her new white gloves touching something made him want to protect her. It must be very harmful for women to dress as beautifully as Emily. This may make it impossible to stay clean for long. He had been with women before, but for the first time everything was different. He felt different. She was a gorgeous lady in her fancy dress, and she deserved better. Even though Molly was busy, Jake was served right away. Charlene, known to everyone as Charlie, placed the menu in front of them. Jake glanced at the fly-covered page and demanded a new one, clean. Charlie stared at Jake as if he had grown horns, but she still went and brought them a clean menu. She started to ask Jake why he was back so soon after breakfast, but the shake of his head silenced her. Taking off her new gloves, Emily chose perhaps a child's portion of stew. Jake saw that she was hungry and wondered when she last ate. He knew that look. He had been like that himself for many years. Not all circumstances were as good as they are now. "Are you and Michael going to live here?" he asked. "Yes, we bought a ranch 20 miles south of here." "Wilson's place?" "Yes, but how did you know?" "I wanted to buy it, but the land agent told me that some people from the East contributed money and bought it first." "I'm sorry." "No, the land adjacent to you is for sale, and I planned to buy it this afternoon. We will be neighbors. I would like that." She was happy. "I would like that." And then realizing that she had missed her husband, she added, "And Michael too." "Well, if you're going to live here, try the steak. The cook copes with this task perfectly. Stew is good, but steak is much better." "That's so much food." He shrugged. "Eat as much as you can." They ordered, and Jake whispered something in Charlie's ear. She returned with good quality whiskey, filled 2 glasses, and set the bottle down. "Oh no, I can't." Jake ignored her protests and raised his glass. "For new friends and neighbors." Caught off guard, she couldn't resist the toast, picking up her glass and downing it in one gulp, just as Jake had done. Her stomach was empty. The drink almost rose back up, but eventually found its home, settling and warming her stomach. She had never tried alcohol before. As they waited for the food, the alcohol entered her body, causing her to giggle. Emily looked around the restaurant. Jake couldn't help but notice how dirty everything looked, with flies swarming around the diners. As if hearing Jake, one fly buzzed right into his mouth just as he opened it to say something to Emily. Jake has eaten a couple of flies in his life. Horses and cattle constantly shit, and shit attracts flies. Nothing can be done. It was a risk associated with the job. His first reaction was to spit it out, but Emily turned to him. There was no way he would spit in front of her. He grabbed the poured whiskey and threw the glass down his throat, but the determined fly somehow avoided the flow of whiskey and clung to the roof of his mouth. The fly's tiny legs tickled him unbearably as it wandered around, exploring the surroundings. He tried to crush her with his tongue, but she managed to dodge his efforts until she flew down and landed on his tonsils. Emily turned to say something to Jake, but stopped abruptly when she saw his face. His cheeks were twitching, and his eyes seemed crazy. Emily thought he might have had a seizure. She had heard of such things. Maybe that's why he didn't have a woman. She saw his eyes suddenly bulge, and his cheeks almost fall off his face as Jake couldn't stand the tickling in his tonsils anymore. He coughed loudly, spitting the poor fly onto the table, where it lay upside down in a pool of saliva, its little legs waving in the air, trying to stand upright. Jake could not take his eyes off the fly, as he counted only 5 moving legs on it instead of the usual 6. Where number 6 had gone, Jake didn't know, but the thought of where she might be made him almost gag. He didn't want to know. "There are only 5 of them," he whispered with horror. "What?" "5 legs. There are only 5 of them," he repeated. Stunned by what had happened, Emily and Jake stared down at the struggling fly, the sudden silence deafening them until it began to giggle. They looked at each other and burst into laughter, tears running down their cheeks. "Was it delicious?" she managed to stammer. The fly finally righted itself and, buzzing indignantly, flew off, seemingly unaffected by the loss of its leg, and joined its circling brothers in their constant hunt. Emily unfolded the napkin and wiped the tears from her eyes. "You must be very hungry, Jake." They both burst into helpless laughter and broke down again every time they looked at each other. People around them began to look at them as if they were crazy. Jake hastily wiped the remaining saliva off the table. The fun died down just in time for Charlie to show up with the food. Emily had never seen anything like it. The steak took up almost the entire plate. The rest was piled high with potatoes, carrots, and wild onions. The whole thing was drenched in a generous amount of beef gravy. In her opinion, this was enough for 2 people. The smell was divine, and her stomach rumbled with hunger. Jake, took a forkful of the stew he'd ordered, declaring he'd had a hearty breakfast, and invited her to try it, brazenly suggesting the intimacy of lovers feeding each other. She let him put the food in her mouth and sat there, enjoying the taste. "Oh, this is amazing, Jake. Now try the steak," taking advantage of the distraction to fill both glasses. Oh, came out of her mouth. "Jake, this is divine. I've never eaten anything so delicious." Jake raised his glass and made another toast. "For good friends." Without hesitation, she lifted her glass and took a sip. Despite her claims that there was too much food, her plate was clean and she ate a piece of pie. Now they were enjoying cups of real coffee. That's why he loved Molly's restaurant. There is so much fake coffee made from bread, chicory, or dandelion roots, and this place ordered it from the East and ground the beans themselves. It was expensive, but worth every penny. During this time, he flirted with her slightly. The alcohol made her giggling and receptive. She teased him back, sometimes playfully slapping his arm when he went too far. Once she called him a boor, but the wide smile on her lips said otherwise. She herself enjoyed it. Finally, having eaten her fill, her little belly bulged out slightly and Jake proposed. "Michael will not finish soon, but I want to settle the issue with the purchase of real estate. Maybe you'd like to come with me. The land agent has a huge map of the area on his wall so you can see where your property is located. I'll show you where your house is. You will also be able to see all the roads, lakes, and streams. This will help you navigate." For a moment, she felt uneasy. It was extremely indecent to rush around the city like this with an unfamiliar man. But alcohol and a full belly after the first good lunch in several days forced her to decide on an adventure. Besides, she was having fun for the first time in a long time, and it would be useful to get to know the area better. A map is a great place to start. She nodded. She would like to go. He held out his hand to her, and she didn't resist, as he took her new gloves and kissed her fingers before putting them back on. He noticed that she hadn't bothered to put on her wedding rings while they were having dinner at Molly's. He took this as a good sign. Jake headed to the Pioneer Western Bank first, and Emily was amazed to see the rich wood interior of the teller's office. The polished wood and gilded metal bars in front of the gate gleamed in the light. There was a real glass window at one end. She couldn't even imagine how much that window alone cost. The bank looked very solid and prosperous. She was even more startled when the manager jumped to his feet and came out to greet Jake in person. "Larry, this is Emily." He turned to her, realizing that he did not know her last name. "Bronson," she prompted. "Oh yes, I was waiting for you. I received a telegram from your husband and I understand that you have purchased the Wilson house. Has your husband arrived yet?" "He had a little accident this morning and Jake was kind enough to show me around while he got himself cleaned up. Has our money transfer arrived yet?" "No. What did you expect?" "Yes, this is our money for settling here." "Well, I can track him. It may take a few days, but we will find him. These things happen sometimes." "A few days? But we have a hotel bill to pay and we need supplies. And Larry will cover you for this time, won't he, Larry?" Throwing a meaningful look at him. "Of course, please come in, and we will process your account if your husband can come in later when he is better and sign the papers." While she was signing the paperwork for the account, Jake told Larry that he was buying a lot next to her house. "When Lincoln receives the document, I will tell him to bring it to your safe for safekeeping, and you can pay him the amount due. It should be around $400, $450. He nodded. "I'll take care of this for you, Jake." After finishing their business, they shook Larry's hands and left. Jake took her to the land office and introduced her to Emily. "Lincoln, I need a plot next to the Wilson's house. How much will he charge?" "It's firmly worth $400, Jake." "Okay, that's good. When you register the plot, give the documents to Larry, and he will pay you." "Okay, Jake. By tomorrow morning, he will be yours." Jake led Emily to a large wall map that showed the new plots she and Michael had acquired and his plot. He ran his finger along the edge of the property. "Your house is located approximately here, and mine is here. It's very close." "Yes, that's what I liked. Far enough for privacy, but close enough to have neighbors." or if we need to defend our property. Plus, there's a nice little pond between us that crosses the property line, so it belongs to both of us. You can swim and bathe in it. Can you see him from your house? Yes, he said, giving her a sly smile. Swimming. Naked in front of another man, she thought, and blushed. She slapped his hand. He was unbearably bad, but she kinda liked it. Having finished with the land transactions, they headed to the Emil's dry goods store, where they placed an order for 2 carts, swampers, and supplies for tomorrow. Stepping back out, Jake reached out and laced his strong fingers with hers.